Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice little 3-game NBA slate, and we have an 8-game MLB slate, or sorry, college basketball slate for you. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel a lot. Uh, if we look at the slate here today, we are going to have some good games in the NBA slate, but there's a ton of injuries today, so do keep that in mind. And get into the injury report here for the Chicago Bulls. Levine is questionable for Utah. Markkanen and Clarkson are questionable for Milwaukee. Giannis is questionable, and Middleton is out for the Spurs. Sochan is out, Vassell is out, and Jones is out for the Portland Trailblazers. Sharp is out. So 5 of the teams have guys that are questionable or out today out of the 6. As such, we are going to have an interesting slate here. So let's look at our point guards first. DiVincenzo does look decent for Minnesota today. He should get some good run in the last few. He's been getting over 25 minutes a game most nights. Um, he's a little pricey, but he's got some upside here in a positive matchup, so he's definitely worth a look here. Mike Conley, interesting for Minnesota as well. Conley has been playing in the mid 20 minutes as well, and his price point is also a little higher than I'd like it to be, but he is capable of doing decent. This slate is pretty rough when it comes to point guard, so to keep that in mind. I do think Chris Paul has some utility, but he's kind of a been a best play because he's had 4 games over 37 fantasy points and 4 games under 25. So uh, really hard to tell which way he might go here, but this matchup at least gives him some upside here to do a little bit more. His minutes have been in flux though as well, so it's kind of hard to get there on that guy. But looking at our shooting guards here, um, Stephen Castle, probably not a guy I'm going to roster much, but he is going to start likely. He really hasn't paid off at the price point that he's currently at yet. So even though he started last game, and he should be getting that mid 20s range in minutes. The problem today is a lot of dudes are kind of in that same scenario. Another guy that's kind of in that scenario is Julian Champagny. He's also interesting today. Probably a little bit safer than some of the other guys, but he definitely still a little bit overpriced for his potential production. Anthony Edwards has had 2 really struggle games in a row. Hopefully he can bounce back today, but his price has come down a little. It's kind of up a little, which is definitely hurting his potential here. He does have that 50 fantasy point upside though, and it is a positive matchup, so he's definitely worth a look here. Looking at our small forwards, uh, Castle, Champagny, and Harrison Barnes all look interesting for the Spurs. Now, Barnes, he's definitely a Boomer best play. He started every game so far, but he really has struggled at times. His price is a little bit safer, though, as he has had more games over in the mid 20s in this fantasy point range. I'd also look at Gary Trent Jr., even though he struggled the last 2 games. Um, he definitely has some utility here, as he should be getting in the mid 20s in minutes, and he has some potential here, but he has really struggled a couple games to score. With Giannis likely out, or at least potentially out, he should get a lot more usage, but he just hadn't done anything with it the last couple games. Looking at power forwards, if Giannis were to play, he would be a top tier play. Obviously, he has monster potential every time out, but not sure if he'll end up playing today. He is still questionable. Uh, Julius Randle does look good today. Randle's price is pretty fair. He has struggled last 2 games as well. I think both games, the scoring was a little bit lower. Spurs and Charlotte, they played, and that's probably going to be similar today to Chicago. So I don't think he's not a must play, but he's definitely somebody that can hit his points a little bit better than some of the other guys. Uh, Jeremy Grant for Portland has also played well the last couple games, which gives him some utility on the slate, but he's definitely in a high risk situation, potentially having to deal with Wemby. Looking at center, speaking of Wemby, Wemby's going to be a top tier option today. He struggled last game against Houston, but he should be able to bounce back here against Portland. This game should be one of the higher scoring games, hopefully on the slate. So it should be an interesting game. And this is one of the games, probably the closest game when it comes to potential, getting to the end of the game where it's tight. Julius Randle can also play at this position, and so can Giannis. I'd also look at Rudy Gobert as kind of a contrarian play. Even though he has struggled at times this season, he definitely has some upside. but he's got a very robust play to him. So with that said, let's go and get a college basketball side of this thing. I like college basketball today a lot better than I like the NBA. My goodness, these NBA slates have been rough the last couple days. If we look at this slate, we have quite a few games where at least 5 games that are outside the top 200 teams versus inside the top 100 teams, and then we have 3 other games that are kind of tighter from that perspective. But um, I look for this slate to be pretty interesting. Uh, and we got some good options to look at here. So we'll start with the North Carolina State versus Wake Forest game here. So North Carolina State, they really only have one guy that has a lot of potential today, and that's Glasper here at $7,600. He's a top tier play. He'll get all sorts of usage. Now the question is if he can keep this game close for them in this matchup, but I do think Wake Forest kind of dominates this game, but he is capable, though he's a little bit pricey for a guy on the team, but his usage is probably one of the best on this entire slate, so keep that in mind. Looking at Wake Forest, we do like Halis, Hildreth, Reed, and then Abilu. All 4 of these guys have some potential today. Abilu is nice and cheap at $3,700. He should get into the usage game in this one and should get a decent chunk of minutes, so he's definitely worth a look here. But obviously, he didn't play a ton last season for his last old team. So, but I do look for him to be an interesting play on the slate. As for Halis and Childreth, I think both these guys have some utility. Hunter definitely has been solid for them in the past, and I think he'll be good today. The question is if it gets too much out of hand, if they don't get a full complement of minutes, which is definitely possible. Reed also looks pretty decent today, and Hildreth as well. So, Wake Forest is a team that you can kind of look at as a kind of a stackable team, but they're definitely not a must play by any stretch. Looking at Southern Miss here, we do like Karubalu, but he is extremely expensive for them at $9,000. But he is going to be their top tier usage guy. I do think A&T's guy is better, but are safer from price point, but he's definitely in there. UAB has a good play as well, and that's Lindborg here for them. I think he's in a very good option today. He's got the potential to always hit these fantasy point numbers, and he's actually, he's going to have a lot of opportunity in this game to have a big one. He should be able to get over the 35 fantasy points he needs to pay off here. Looking at Montana State, we actually have 2 guys that have some potential here, and Patterson and then Abankapolo, excuse me. I think Abankapolo is a little bit safer because he's going to get more usage. And I think he's in a good spot here. Looking at Wisconsin, we like Klesmit, Crowell, Tanjay, Blackwell, and Hunter. Now, Hunter is questionable, so keep that in mind. But if he was to play, then he could have some utility here. But I think Crowell's probably my favorite play from the team. He has $7,800. You should get the best usage and have the highest upside on this particular game. Looking at Jacksonville in Florida, Jacksonville has another guy that's kind of going to be a top tier usage guy, and Robert McRae 5. But they actually have a couple other guys that have some potential, and Spence and also in Payne. Both of those guys have some utility, but they're a little bit pricey for the potential. Looking at Florida, Clayton Jr. is going to be a really good option today. Price point is a little higher than I'd like, but he's definitely capable. Will Richard, Martin, and Condon are all kind of contrarian options on the slate. Martin and Condon both should get a decent amount of usage, though. And then Alexis is kind of a contrarian play that you could utilize. Now, he did very well at a lower level school last year, and he looks to try to get into the mix here at Florida. So we kind of have to wait and see what he's going to do there, but he definitely looks interesting. Looking at Niagara against Michigan State, Niagara has one guy that definitely has some utility here, and that's Davis. Now, he is cheap here, but he should be their top guy. He was at another team last year, but he should still be their top usage guy today. And that's going to give him some utility, especially because he's $3,300. So he's definitely somebody you've got to consider. You don't have to use him because there's a couple other guys in the same scenario, but he's definitely looking okay. Williamson and Marshall also look interesting today if you think they can keep the game close, but I don't really expect that. Looking at Michigan State, Akins is their top play, but he is a little bit expensive here. I don't think he's a must play, but he's definitely interesting. Booker looks interesting here as well, and he should be a guy from that should improve his role this year. And then Fears, he's also kind of cheap and should improve his role this year. So we'll have to wait and see how those games go, how they get going. But those guys definitely have some utility today. Looking at Jacksonville State, uh, they have a guy in Brigham Jr. that has some utility here. He's not a great play, but he's definitely okay. Nicholson is a guy that I think is a little bit safer on the team, that has a little bit more upside, but he's definitely capable as well. Air Force, Taylor and Becker uh, both have some good potential today, though I do think Becker's a little bit safer, but Taylor definitely is the top play on the team. As for this particular game, I should note that Jacksonville State is actually favored to win, and so I do think that using Nicholson, for instance, would not be a bad option on the slate. Looking at Cal Poly versus California, Cal Poly has one guy that's kind of decent, and Tarlac. Now he's dirt cheap, but he should be their top usage guy. But he's not going to be super used. They're going to use a lot of different guys, so he's one of the weaker options, but he's definitely an interesting play. If we look at California, though, we like Patricius, or how you say his name. He's going to have a lot of potential today. He's priced pretty fairly for his upside here. Question is if he gets a full complement of meds, so it gets out of hand. Then Tucker also has some utility, though he's not a must-play by any stretch. Looking at Idaho State, we do like Griffin today. He's very expensive, and I don't think that a lot of players on this team really have much upside, but he does have some, though they do tend to go deeper in the bench, so to keep that in mind. And then for Southern California, Claude, for them, he's a fairly priced play here with some upside, and then Pope is also a fairly priced play for his upside in this game. I think both those guys could be used at the same time. So with that said,